Despite what you may think, the space race is far from over. In fact, it's only just begun, with aerospace corporations like SpaceX and Blue Origin doing their best to get the leg up on one another. And as you can imagine, this has resulted in a rather exciting time for fans of the ever-expanding universe. But what space headlines should you be paying attention to right now? For all this and more, stay tuned. First up on our list is the risk of mega constellations like Starlink could pose. An issue that experts brought up a couple of days ago when discussing the effects that such a project could have on our search for life in the universe. For those of you who don't know, Starlink is a satellite internet constellation which is owned and operated by SpaceX, no doubt the biggest aerospace engineering firm of our time. And according to reports, the purpose of this mega constellation is to provide high-speed, low-latency broadband internet across the globe. In other words, in an attempt by Elon Musk to ensure that even the hardest-to-reach places are able to stay connected in a world that is already ruled by online systems. But there appears to be a negative to such an incredible project. According to some experts on the scene, the signals from the internet beaming satellites partially blind radio telescopes, while the Square Kilometre Array, suffice to say, this makes it quite difficult to look outwards and search the expanding universe for signs of life. The hunt for exoplanets will also be significantly influenced by the presence of the completed Starlink project, which may eventually lead to our defeat if we can't one day roll back the effect of climate change. As it turns out, finding another planet like Earth that's able to provide for human life is about the only option available at the moment. And the question that remains is whether fast internet is worth the cost. To really decide on the answer, we have to look at how the SKAO will be affected. Like all radio telescopes, which seek a place that is far removed from the hustle and bustle of city life, the Square Kilometre Array Observatory is currently being built in the countryside of Western Australia, quite a ways away from Perth. The reason why many radio telescopes find themselves in the middle of nowhere is due to the signal mixing power of human electronics. You see, radio waves travel along the same frequencies as we use for cell phones and television transmissions, making any radio telescope present in a city almost useless in its ability. In simple terms, signals cross and data becomes unreadable, which is why the SKAO site is set as far away from human life as possible. But when you have a mega constellation shining internet beams across the globe, it really doesn't matter where a specific radio telescope is situated. It would be as if the telescope was in the middle of a city being plagued by various streams of data that make a result simply unobservable. Luckily, the SKAO makes use of a protected band of frequency that will ignore most of the data streams. That being said, this isn't true for all functions of the radio telescope. According to experts, the protected band of frequency used to search for exoplanets and microscopic molecules of life is also being used by Starlink, which is why a solid disruption is expected when the build is complete. Is there anything we can actually do about this though? Well, it turns out there is, which is why experts want Starlink to remain as is. You see, the satellites currently in orbit as a resultant of SpaceX will not fully blind the SKAO once completed. There's no doubt that a lot of background noise to sift through because of the internet streaming beams, but it's a job that the employees of the observatory will be more than capable of doing. That being said, the launch of further satellites into the orbit of the Earth will drastically increase the amount of background noise that has to be dealt with. And at one point, this will become somewhat of an impossibility. In other words, experts want SpaceX to halt the launch of their project by further margins, stating that an increase in the amount of satellites will seriously hurt the information we receive about the universe in the future. At the moment, SpaceX has launched around 2,000 satellites connected to the Starlink project. And while this may sound like a lot, it's only 1/6 of the amount necessary for completion. And it's going to take more than a few experts to stop the capitalistic monster that is SpaceX. The organization has a lot to lose if the project is unsuccessful after all. But drivers of the SKAO have also been in talks with SpaceX to ensure that the satellites in question are never shining internet beams in the direction of the observatory, as this could work and be the least destructive methodology followed to ensure that everyone's happy. On the topic of SpaceX satellites, they seem to be tumbling out of orbit right now. In fact, a spokesperson for the aerospace engineer said just a few days ago that around 40 of the 49 satellites that were launched last week have likely re-entered the atmosphere and burnt up already. This doesn't just happen though. The satellites met their demise when encountering a pretty hefty geomagnetic storm. For those of you who don't know, a geomagnetic storm refers to the situation in which Earth's magnetosphere is temporarily disrupted because of some external factor. And in this case, the factor was a rogue solar wind that struck the magnetosphere and rocked the SpaceX satellites out of orbit. Despite ground controllers doing their best to flatten the satellites by putting them in a hibernation mode, nothing could be done to prevent them from being knocked off course, which is why a number of them have already perished with others set to follow. You might also be asking why only the satellites launched last week were affected, and as it turns out, SpaceX launches satellites into a lower orbit in the beginning so that duds can return to Earth without posing a danger to other spacecraft. Since they were already so close to Earth's atmosphere, it's no wonder why they burnt up once rocked off course. This has been described as nothing more than a unique situation though, and SpaceX seemed to be more than willing to launch again in the future. The risk we take for advancement, we suppose. NASA and SpaceX have also commented on that lagging Dragon parachute issue. An issue which scared the majority of us when an infrared image of a Crew Dragon showed that only 3 of its 4 parachutes had deployed once safely in the Earth's atmosphere. According to both organizations, a lot of research is being put into why one of the parachutes did not deploy. On other occasions, a parachute was found to deploy late, but in both instances, the statement was clear that they don't believe the issue poses a safety risk. There are 4 parachutes for a reason after all, but it makes sense that they would continue to study the reasons behind this failure to eradicate it completely. You wouldn't want to be caught with 4 bum parachutes after all. As of right now, the best reasoning behind the failure has been cited as aerodynamic issues with the parachute system, which isn't likely going to call for a heavy fix considering how many designs actually exist for parachute systems, and according to reports, this issue will be completely resolved before the next Dragon mission is set to launch. There was, however, quite a lot of criticism to cover, with many suggesting that SpaceX has seen a few lagging parachute systems in its days. But it seems like these were different systems altogether, with the Dragon missions currently making use of Mark III systems. Either way, we hope the issue is resolved as quickly as possible. We wouldn't want anything disastrous happening in the future. Last but not least, India has finally put forward a date for its lunar launch. According to reports, India is aiming at an August 2022 launch for its Chandrayaan-3 lunar lander mission, a mission which aims to land a spacecraft on the surface of the moon once more. And considering how this statement was made by the nation's science and technology minister, we have a feeling that things are at least somewhat on track. This will be India's second attempt at reaching the moon, with the first attempt back in 2019 failing when the Chandrayaan-2 crashed into the lunar surface. And since the orbiter of the Chandrayaan-2 is still orbiting the lunar body, it can luckily still be used for communication purposes by the Chandrayaan-3, explaining why another orbiter is not in the process of being built. It's about time that the second attempt takes place though, with the initial launch having been set for early 2020. But since the coronavirus pandemic did its best to knock the world for a loop, it makes sense that things were delayed. And there you have it, everything you need to know about the space headlines currently roaming around the internet. What do you think of the continuation of Starlink though? And are you looking forward to the Chandrayaan-3 attempt? Be sure to let us know in the comments section down below.